Welcome to Step 1, Part 1. This will be a review of macro elements affecting your site. So macro means big picture. It's mostly, but not necessarily, forces from outside of your site, which will still exert, or cause an effect on your site. There's a tiny bit of overlap between what I've listed for macro in this step and micro factors in the next step, but I had to split the category somewhere, and I hope that you find the way that I'm presenting it to be helpful. So our first macro level factor would be our hardiness zone. This is basically a scale to represent the average minimum temperature for a given region. This is simply setting one of the most basic bounds of your potential production, because one way to categorize plants is by how cold they can get before they, die. This is setting a thermodynamic limit on what kind of plants you can grow and where you can grow them and when you can start to grow them, unless and until you implement some kind of protection to alter their microclimate. But again, macro level, what is your hardiness zone? For example, my site, which you will see soon, I'm in USDA zone 6B with an average annual low temperature of about -5 to 0 Fahrenheit, or about -20 to -18 Celsius. And just because this is a convenient time to be concentrating this information in one place, I've included both the average high temp and hottest point of summer for my location as well. So next, what is your frost risk? Frost risk. What are the average dates for your last frost and your first frost? For my example, I have a year-round frost risk, no average span of frost-free days. Bummer, real big bummer. That means when we get to the planning infrastructure stage of this whole tour, I'll just have more protection to account for, which I guess is good. It'll make an easy example for you, or more examples for you all. So moving on, precipitation, again, external factors. It's basic and straightforward, just how much rain or otherwise falls in your area in a year. The average for my example is just over a foot. I get about 13 inches of precipitation per year. And you might be thinking, oh, but there's so many more things to account for when it comes to precipitation and crop growth. And you are right. But as soon as you start picking at those details, well, we just fall down the rabbit hole following that thread. So we're just trying to stay at the macro level, big picture kind of thing. So just knowing average level of precipitation, 13 inches, answers our very basic question of, will we need supplemental irrigation? And the answer is almost positively yes. Okay, so let's look at wind. If you've lived in your area long enough, you might already know which way the wind usually blows. Otherwise, you can look up what's called a wind rose online using one of the sites that I've linked below. You should be able to look up data for your production, at least your production seasons, if not every season of your, every representative season for your area. Ultimately, just make note of your primary, your seasonal, and your stormy wind directions. I spent a little bit of extra time and made a GIF out of wind roses for an entire year from the nearest weather station to me. So here we can watch it start in spring, right? Starting in March, kicking off spring. We watch it through the dead of winter. And what I see is that in spring, we start with strong winds from the northwest, the south. This quickly calms into simply just a northwestern wind, which holds through summer. And then as the temperature cools, a wind comes in from the southeast and basically becomes a driving force of cold through all winter. And then we're back to see what a tumultuous shift in March, spring as we see the pattern restart. Okay, so we can watch this play once more. Right? That's the earth breathing around us. It's kind of cool, right? Okay, final stretch. The sun. Unless you are footing the bill for artificial lighting, then the availability of sunlight is a resource tied to your spot on the planet. Two things you could do. The most broad stroke here would be to simply, look at your latitude and list yourself as either tropical, temperate, or Arctic. A bit more nuance would be to list the hours of daylight you have for each of your solstices, your summer and winter solstice, just to kind of get an idea of what kind of extreme you are on the planet. That's it for now for sunlight, but we will return to sunlight later. One of the final things is to examine the transportation options around you. It's not on your site itself, not yet. Again, macro kind of external things. We're looking out to the major transport routes nearest to you. It's likely to just be your two biggest roads, but in some cases it may include waterways or other kinds of trails or routes people might use to routinely pass your location. If you're trying to sell your goods, then this is helpful for you to understand so that you can know your potential connection to a marketplace. If you're doing this for yourself and not exporting anything, well, then you're still going to need to import something, whether it be your friends driving in to donate their labor, or unloading a pallet of fertilizer, or dumping a load of compost, or any number of other activities which still require a connection to the world at large. Okay, last step. Try to get a feel for the weed pressure in your region. The USDA puts out a list of noxious weeds which, if applicable to your location, serves as a great master list. Note your relevant page, like find your region in there, go by state, and then sort through it for the ones that you recognize by site or by name. These are probably the ones that are more common in your area, and you can create kind of this sub-list to serve as a starting point of what will eventually become part of your pest management plan. But more on that later, a bit later. For now, you've completed your assessment of the macro level of factors affecting your site. So bravo! The next part is essentially examine all these points again, but in much finer detail within the site itself. This will yield an assessment of the microclimates at our site.